Hello, and welcome to today's story. My name is Philip, and I like to dive deep into scary Asian stories and cover them in my videos. If you have an interesting story you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always read all comments. For now, let's get into today's story, where we have a few terrifying stories to share tonight. One of them takes us into the sleepless veins of Tokyo, where neon lights, endless crowds, and echoing train stations hide more than just tired commuters. This story begins at Shinagawa Station, one of the busiest transport hubs in all of Japan. But after midnight, when the last train has left and the city finally exhales, it becomes something entirely different. Empty, humming, alive in a way that feels wrong. Among the night staff, there's one rule whispered quietly but never written down. Never wait on platform 7 after midnight. It sounds like superstition. Just another urban legend born out of boredom and night shifts. But those who've worked there long enough know better. Because sometimes, when the lights flicker and the announcements glitch, the trains that appear aren't heading anywhere in this world. It was a cold Thursday night in early winter, the kind of Tokyo evening where the air bites your skin and every exhale turns to mist. The rush hour chaos had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of vending machines and the occasional metallic echo of footsteps. Most people had gone home hours ago, but not him. His name was Kenji Sato, 37, mid-level office worker, exhausted from another overtime shift that blurred one day into the next. He had missed his last train. Kenji stood beneath the harsh white lights of Shinagawa Station, his shoulders heavy beneath a cheap gray coat. The clock above the concourse ticked closer to midnight. The digital display showed the last departures fading away, one by one, until only the hollow reflection of his own face stared back at him in the glass. He sighed, checking. His phone, no taxis available, no friends nearby, no hotel vacancies within walking distance. Just his own tired reflection and the long, empty stretch of Platform 7. He remembered the platform vaguely from his younger days, when he used to take the morning express to Yokohama. But now, as he descended the stairs, something about it felt wrong. The air grew colder, heavier. The sound of the escalator echoed unnaturally, like it was descending into a tunnel that had no end. Even the station's background music, that cheerful chime Tokyo commuters knew so well, seemed to fade the deeper he went. When he reached the platform, the fluorescent lights flickered, then steadied. The space was empty, perfectly still. A single paper cup rolled lazily across the tiles, bumping softly against the yellow safety line before stopping. Kenji looked around. The vending machines still glowed, their buzzing the only sign of life. He sat down on one of the cold metal benches and exhaled, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He planned to wait for the first morning train around 5. Just a few hours, he told himself. He'd scrolled through his phone, maybe take a short nap, but deep down, something in him felt uneasy. He couldn't shake the faint sense that he shouldn't be there. Maybe it was the way the lights dimmed slightly at the far end of the platform, or the way the air smelled faintly of burnt metal like old rails after a storm. A few meters away, a janitor was sweeping near the exit. Kenji called out to ask if the station stayed open overnight. The man didn't answer. He just stopped sweeping, turned slowly, and stared at Kenji for a long moment before pointing at his watch. Midnight was close. Then, without a word, the janitor turned and left, his footsteps echoing up the stairs until they faded completely. Kenji tried to laugh it off. Maybe the guy was just tired too. But when he glanced back at the digital board, his heart sank. The display was flickering again, rows of text appearing and disappearing too fast to read. He caught glimpses of old station names, ones that didn't make sense anymore, ones that had been demolished years ago. He rubbed his eyes, blaming exhaustion, the overtime, the fluorescent glare, But the longer he stared, the more certain he became that something was wrong with the board. The arrival times were counting down, one after another, for trains that didn't exist. And beneath the digital flicker, faintly, he thought he heard something, a whispering rhythm, like footsteps pacing just behind him. Kenji turned. The platform was still empty. The cold air pressed close around him, heavy and silent. He could see his breath clouding faintly in front of him. The station clock struck midnight, and from somewhere down the track, a low metallic rumble began to rise. At first, Kenji thought it was just the subway's ventilation system, one of those deep mechanical sounds that rolled through the tunnels now and then. But this noise was different. It didn't fade away. It pulsed, rising and falling like the slow inhale of something alive. He sat up straighter, squinting down the length of Platform 7. The tunnel at the far end was a dark mouth, the kind of darkness that even fluorescent light couldn't reach. The rails shimmered faintly, as though something far away was reflecting the station lights back toward him. Kenji checked the digital board again. The screen glitched once more, briefly showing a departure, 2-6 for Kisaragi Station. His breath caught. That couldn't be right. There was no Kisaragi Station. It was an urban legend, an old internet story about a phantom station that people arrived at but never returned from. He blinked, and the text disappeared. Now, the screen was blank. Just a faint static flicker. The rumble grew louder. Kenji stepped closer to the yellow line, peering into the tunnel. Nothing. Only darkness. Then, the faintest breeze brushed against his face, followed by a scent that made his stomach tighten, burnt oil mixed with something older, something like dust and wet iron. It smelled like rusting machinery and the stale breath of a forgotten place. He turned around again, uneasy. The vending machines at the back of the platform hummed louder than before. One of them, a bright red one selling canned coffee, blinked as if someone had just used it. Aiken clattered down the chute, but there was no one there. Kenji hesitated before walking over. He looked inside the vending slot and saw a single can resting neatly, upright, as though placed there. It wasn't the brand advertised on the front. The label was worn, printed in an old-fashioned font he hadn't seen since he was a kid. The expiration date had faded completely. He didn't touch it. He just stood there, listening. The rumbling sound had stopped. In its place, a soft clicking echoed through the platform. At first, he thought it was the vending machine resetting itself. But then it came again from the opposite end of the platform, like the rhythmic tap of footsteps on tile. Kenji's throat tightened. He turned slowly, scanning the empty platform. Nothing moved. But the sound came again, closer this time. A faint, measured rhythm. Step, step, step. He tried to call out, his voice catching in his throat. Hello? No answer. Only the steady echo of unseen feet. Then, over the PA system, a soft crackle filled the air. The speakers above him buzzed to life. Static first, then a faint female voice, distorted and distant. Now boarding. Track 7. Departure. 0206. Kenji froze. His blood ran cold. The voice was reading the same time and platform that had glitched across the screen moments ago. He turned toward the tunnel again. That's when the lights flickered, one after another, down the length of the platform like a wave of dimming bulbs receding toward the tunnel's mouth. The darkness crept closer, with each flicker, swallowing the far end of the platform completely. Kenji's breathing quickened. He took a step back, gripping the bench behind him. For a moment, all was quiet again. Then, deep within the tunnel, he heard the faint squeal of metal on metal, a sound he knew too well, the approach of a train, but it couldn't be. The schedule was empty. No trains were supposed to run this late. The rumble returned, louder now, shaking the tiles beneath his feet. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. A gust of cold wind shot through the tunnel, carrying with it the faint sound of brakes screeching against the rails. Kenji stepped back again, his eyes locked on the tunnel's darkness. A glimmer appeared, a dim headlight piercing the void. For a split second, he almost felt relieved. Maybe a special maintenance train? Maybe he wasn't alone after all. But then, the light grew brighter, revealing not the sleek silver of modern carriages, but something old. The train that emerged looked ancient, its metal sides scarred and scorched, the windows clouded with grime. The front bore an outdated emblem from the 1972nd, one he'd only seen in old news clippings. The headlights flickered. The wheels screamed against the rails as it slowed, stopping perfectly in front of him. Kenji stared, his pulse pounding. The digital board above him lit up again for a brief moment. 2-6 for Yotsuya Station. The doors hissed open. A wave of cold air rolled out, heavy with the scent of smoke and something else like old fabric soaked in rain. Inside, the carriage was filled with pale shapes, passengers, sitting motionless. Their faces turned toward him, each one expressionless, drained of color, their eyes wide but unfocused. Kenji took a trembling step backward, and then he saw the conductor. A man in an old soot-stained uniform stepped out from the first car. His cap was tilted low, but the lower half of his face was visible and half burned. His skin was melted and darkened, one eye missing. He lifted a gloved hand and gestured politely toward the open door. Kenji stumbled back, shaking his head. No, this isn't. This can't be real. The conductor tilted his head almost in curiosity, then slowly extended his arm further, the gesture precise and polite, as though he'd done it 1,000 times before. Now boarding, the voice repeated faintly from the speaker above, this time clearer. Final departure, track 7. Kenji turned and ran. His footsteps echoed wildly against the tiles, his breath sharp and ragged. He didn't look back. He just ran for the stairs, the pounding of his shoes drowned out by the rising screech of metal behind him. The last thing he heard before the lights blinked out completely was the faint ding of the doors closing, and the sound of that ghostly train pulling away into the dark. Kenji didn't stop running until he reached the concourse. His lungs burned, and his heartbeat thundered louder than the echo of his own footsteps. But when he looked up, the staircase that should have led to the main exit was pitch black. The lights had gone out completely. He froze. The air was cold and unmoving. Behind him, the faint hum of the ghostly train faded into silence, swallowed by the tunnels below. Kenji took a step forward, trying to steady his breathing. The sound of his shoe hitting the tile echoed unnaturally, as if the station were much larger than it should be. He pulled out his phone, no signal, not even a flicker of Wi-Fi. Just the black reflection of his own face staring back. Then, faintly, a movement caught his eye in the screen's glare. Something behind him. He turned sharply. Nothing there. Only the staircase, still half lit by the emergency exit sign that flickered like a dying firefly. Kenji exhaled shakily and started climbing. Each step groaned beneath his weight, the sound reverberating through the empty structure. Halfway up, he heard another set of footsteps following him, light, deliberate, one step behind. He spun around. The staircase below was empty. "Is someone there?" he called out. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the station's vast emptiness. Then, from above, came the faint sound of sweeping, the dry rasp of a broom against tile. Kenji froze again, the janitor, the same one who'd pointed at his watch earlier. He climbed faster until the upper landing came into view. There he was, standing near the ticket gates, head lowered, sweeping the same patch of floor over and over again. Kenji hesitated before calling out, "Hey, what's going on down there? The trains, the lights, did you see that?" The janitor didn't answer. He just kept sweeping. Kenji walked closer. "Hey, I said..." The man stopped. The broom slipped from his hands and clattered onto the tiles. Then, slowly, he looked up. Kenji's voice died in his throat. The janitor's eyes were white, cloudy, unfocused. His face pale and slack like wax left in the sundae. He opened his mouth, and instead of words, a faint metallic hiss came out like air escaping from a broken pipe. Kenji stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the broom. "What the hell?" The janitor tilted his head, and in a rasp, barely louder than a whisper, he muttered, "You shouldn't be here." Kenji's blood ran cold. "What?" The man took one step forward, the movement jerky, almost mechanical. "It's past midnight," he murmured, his voice distant, hollow. "Platform 7 isn't for the living anymore." Before Kenji could respond, the station lights flickered again, not just above them, but all along the corridor. The digital signboards turned on at once, displaying the same message over and over in rapid succession. 2, 6, for Kisaragi Station. Every board, every platform. The words glowed in perfect synchronization. Kenji backed away as the janitor suddenly dropped to his knees. His mouth moved soundlessly, eyes wide, with fear. Then, as the light above him buzzed and blinked, his figure began to fade, not vanish instantly, but dissolve, fragment by fragment, into thin air. Within seconds, the space where he'd stood was empty. Kenji's knees almost gave out. He turned and bolted through the ticket gates. But when he reached the main concourse, his stomach turned. The entire station had changed. The walls were different, older, dirt-streaked, covered with posters, advertising events from decades ago. The bright, modern convenience store near the entrance was gone. In its place stood a shuttered kiosk with a faded sign written in hiragana no longer used today. He was still in Shinagawa Station, but not the one he knew. A faint crackle came from the overhead speakers, static. Then the same calm female voice echoed through the empty air. "Attention, passengers. Final departure from Platform 7 will commence shortly. Please prepare to board." Kenji turned toward the corridor leading back down. The lights were flickering again, sequentially, leading his eyes back to where he'd just fled. It was like the station itself was calling him back. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, I'm done. I'm leaving." He rushed toward the main exit, slamming his hands against the glass doors. Locked. He tried again. Nothing. Then, through the reflection in the glass, he saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the corridor. The conductor, still half burned. Still holding out his gloved hand. The gesture polite, patient, unchanged. Kenji backed away from the door, his breath fogging up the glass. When he turned, the reflection was gone. The corridor was empty again. But the announcements didn't stop. The speakers crackled once more, this time with faint, overlapping voices. Dozens of them. Male, female, young, old, all whispering the same phrase beneath the static. Next stop, Kisaragi Station. The lights flickered faster now, buzzing violently. The air itself began to vibrate. Kenji covered his ears, shouting, but the sound only grew louder, filling his head with the same whispered rhythm. Footsteps echoed all around him, hundreds of them, circling, moving in perfect sync. He stumbled toward the staircase, desperate to get away, but the moment his foot hit the first step, the entire platform vibrated beneath him. The station clock above him ticked backward, the second hand spinning wildly, and beneath the rising hum of electricity, he heard the unmistakable sound again, the screech of metal wheels, approaching fast, echoing up through the floor. The ghost train was coming back. The sound grew louder, the metallic shriek of wheels grinding against the rails, reverberating through the floor and into Kenji's bones. The fluorescent lights above him stuttered in a violent rhythm, each flicker revealing a distorted fragment of the station, a rusted sign, a cracked tile, a dark smear that hadn't been there before. The air was charged, humming with static, and Kenji's breath came in ragged bursts as he stumbled toward the edge of the concourse. The clock above the ticket gates spun backward so fast its hands were a blur. Every screen, every announcement board now displayed the same impossible message in perfect unison. 2-6, now arriving. He knew what that meant. The ghost train was returning. Kenji backed away, whispering to himself, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He could hear it now, the low growl of the engine, the clattering rhythm of its approach, not from below, but from somewhere beneath the walls, as if the tracks were shifting inside the very structure of the station. The floor vibrated beneath his shoes, tiny cracks spiderwebbing across the tiles. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The sound cut off. The lights froze mid-flicker. Even the hum of electricity vanished. For a few heartbeats, there was nothing, just a void of silence so complete that Kenji could hear the farm pounding of his own heart. Then came the announcement. It wasn't the soft, feminine voice from before. This one was deeper, rougher, distorted with static. Arrival confirmed. Shinagawa, track 7. Last passenger. Please proceed. Kenji's eyes darted toward the stairway leading back down. The darkness at the bottom was pulsing, faintly breathing, almost. He could feel something pulling at him, like the air itself had weight, dragging him toward the platform. He gripped the railing, fighting the sensation, but with every flicker of light, the station around him seemed to change again. The posters on the walls peeled away, revealing rusted panels beneath. The tiled floor darkened with soot. Even the air grew thick with the smell of burnt metal and rain-soaked ash. Kenji's knees wobbled. "This isn't real," he whispered, but his voice barely made a sound. Then, from somewhere behind him, came a faint chime, a ticket gate beeping open. He turned. A single ticket had printed itself from the machine, curling out slowly. Its paper was yellowed, the ink faded, and across the center, written in old kanji, were 2 words that made his stomach twist. Yotsuya Station. The same name from the legends. Kenji stared at it, frozen. Then, from behind him, the PA system crackled again, and the female voice returned softer now, almost kind. "Please present your ticket for departure." He felt something brush his shoulder. Cold, soft, like the brush of a passing sleeve. Kenji spun around. The concourse was full, not bustling, silent. Dozens of figures stood motionless in front of him, dressed in clothing from different eras. A man in a Showa-era business suit. A woman in a 1982nd office uniform. A schoolgirl with an old satchel clutched in her hands. Their faces were pale, faintly gray, eyes blank and unfocused. They all held tickets, and they were all looking at him. Kenji staggered back, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. No. Then the lights dimmed again, and every head turned in unison toward the stairway, the entrance to Platform 7. A new wind rose from below, cold and heavy, smelling of rust and smoke. The ghostly crowd began to move, their footsteps perfectly synchronized, echoing like a single heartbeat. Kenji stumbled aside as they passed him, one by one, heading toward the platform in utter silence. He tried to shout, to warn them, but no sound came out. His throat tightened, as though invisible fingers were pressing against it. He looked down. The ticket that had printed itself from the machine was now in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. The voice returned, soft and gentle. "Last passenger, please proceed." Kenji's fingers trembled as he looked down at the ticket. The ink seemed to bleed slightly, the letters shifting until they formed his own name beneath the destination. Kenji Sato, 26 Kisaragi Station. His mind screamed to run, but his body wouldn't listen. His feet moved on their own, step by step, toward the staircase. The deeper he descended, the more the air changed. The hum of fluorescent lights faded into the faint hiss of rain. The walls around him were no longer white tile, but stained concrete, dripping with moisture. A faint light glowed from below the headlights of the train, waiting patiently at the platform. He reached the final step. Platform 7 was no longer empty. The ghost train stood there, gleaming faintly in the dim light, its windows filled once again with motionless passengers. The conductor waited by the open door, that same polite gesture frozen in time, his burned face half-shadowed beneath his cap. Kenji's breath shook. "Why me?" he whispered. "What do you want?" The conductor's head tilted slightly. When he spoke, his voice was calm and formal, though every word seemed to echo from somewhere deep inside the tunnel. Completion of route. All passengers must board. Kenji stepped back. "No!" But the air pressed against him, forcing him forward. The platform began to rumble again, tiles lifting and shattering beneath his feet. The yellow safety line glowed faintly, like the edge of a burning fuse. The crowd of pale passengers boarded one by one, disappearing into the carriages without a sound. The conductor turned his gaze back to Kenji, extending his hand once more. The ticket in Kenji's hand began to burn. He dropped it instinctively, but it didn't fall. It hovered in the air for a moment, glowing faintly, before dissolving into ash. Then, from the far end of the platform, he saw something a flicker of movement. A small boy stood near the edge, holding a school bag. He looked terrified, human, alive. Kenji blinked in disbelief. "Hey, don't go in there!" he shouted, rushing forward. But the boy just stared at him wide-eyed, trembling, and whispered something Kenji barely caught. "They told me you'd come too." And before Kenji could reach him, the boy stepped inside the train. The doors hissed closed. The train doors sealed shut with a metallic hiss that echoed through the entire station. For a moment, everything was still. The lights flickered overhead, and the ghostly train just sat there humming softly, like a living thing waiting to breathe. Kenji stood frozen on the platform, staring at the closed doors. His reflection shimmered faintly in the darkened window, merging with the rows of pale faces inside. He could still see the little boy sitting by the window now, his eyes wide and hollow. Then, from within the carriage, the conductor turned. He looked straight at Kenji, and this time, his expression changed. The polite neutrality vanished, replaced by something deeper, something almost sorrowful. "Final call," the voice over the speakers whispered. All passengers accounted for. Kenji's legs trembled. He stumbled backward toward the stairs, desperate to get away. But halfway up, he stopped. There, on the wall beside him, was a memorial plaque, one he hadn't noticed before. It was old, tarnished, the brass darkened by time. The inscription, though worn, was still legible, under the faint light. In memory of the 47 who lost their lives in the derailment of 1972 Platform 7, Shinagawa Station. Kenji's mouth went dry. He leaned closer, tracing the engraved names with shaking fingers. Halfway down the list, he froze. Sato, Hiroshi, age 10. His father's name. Kenji's knees nearly buckled. He remembered the story. His father's older brother, his uncle, had died young in a train accident before Kenji was born. But no one ever told him the details. His family never spoke of it, only muttering that his father had been spared by chance that night. But here, right in front of him, was proof. His father's name was carved among the dead. He turned back toward the platform. The ghostly train still waited, the doors sealed, the windows pulsing faintly with dim light. Kenji's mind raced. The boy, the one he'd seen, had looked so familiar. The same eyes as his father in old photographs, the same shape of face. Was that why the conductor had looked at him differently? He took a step closer, heart pounding. "Who are you?" he whispered. "What is this place?" The conductor tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Then the speaker above crackled again. "This station is a crossing," said the female voice. It was softer now, almost human. A boundary between the tracks of the living and the roots long forgotten. Kenji's breath hitched. "A crossing? Every night," the voice continued. "The 2-6 departs. It carries those who miss their final destination, those who are left behind." Kenji's chest tightened. "You mean the dead?" Silence. Then faintly, the unremembered. He stared back at the train. The passengers inside didn't move, but something about their stillness felt heavier now, not mindless, but patient, as though they were waiting for acknowledgement, for someone to remember them. Kenji took another step forward, the tiles cold beneath his shoes. "Then why me?" The lights dimmed again, and the voice shifted, lowering almost to a whisper. "You carry their name, their unfinished story." Kenji's breath faltered. The realization hit him like a wave. The family silence, the unexplained nightmares he'd had as a child of trains vanishing into tunnels, his father's habit of flinching at the sound of station announcements. It wasn't coincidence. It was memory, echoing through blood. He turned toward the tunnel where the train waited. "You're saying I was supposed to come here?" A pause. Then, gently, "You were never supposed to wait." Before he could ask what that meant, the platform trembled again. The ghost train's headlights flickered brighter, flooding the space with pale white light. The air pulsed with the faint sound of overlapping whispers, not screams, but words half lost to time. Kenji covered his ears, but the voices grew louder, rising into something almost melodic, and then he understood they weren't whispering his name. They were whispering, "Thanks." The boy in the window looked out once more, his face softer now. He pressed a hand against the glass, and for an instant, Kenji saw a flicker of recognition. The same eyes. The same fragile innocence frozen in time since 1972. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the door. The air between them shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement. The boy mouthed a single word. "Go." Kenji stumbled back, confusion and terror colliding in his chest. The ground beneath his feet vibrated again, and a deep hum filled the station. The train's horn wailed low, mournful, ancient. The lights along the tunnel turned green. The final departure was beginning. Kenji turned and ran for the stairs, but when he reached the top, the exit doors were gone. In their place was only darkness, a void stretching endlessly forward. Behind him, the sound of the train began to move. Slow at first, then faster. He glanced back one last time. The conductor was still standing at the open carriage door, arm raised in a crisp salute. And then, for the first time, Kenji saw it clearly. Half of the conductor's face, though burned, was unmistakably familiar. His father. The world seemed to tilt. The ghost train screeched as it accelerated, pulling away into the tunnel that led nowhere. The wind it left behind tore through the platform, scattering papers and dust, sweeping past Kenji like a cold hand, dragging him toward the dark. And then, just as suddenly as it began silence, the platform was empty again. The digital board blinked back to life, displaying the next morning's first train to Yokohama. The air was still, normal. Kenji stood there, trembling, unable to speak. The memorial plaque glinted faintly behind him, the engraved names now shining clean as if freshly polished. And just beneath his father's name, a new one had appeared: Kenji Sato. The next sound he heard was the distant chime of the morning service bell. Morning light poured through the glass panels of Shinagawa Station, washing the concourse in a soft golden haze. The first trains of the day arrived, brakes squealing, doors sliding open. Commuters rushed past each other, coffee in hand, unaware of anything unusual. A station attendant made his usual rounds along Platform 7. He yawned, clipboard in hand, counting benches and checking emergency lights. Everything seemed normal until he reached the far end of the platform. There, beside the yellow safety line, lay a neatly folded gray coat, a phone placed gently on top, wallet beside it, the kind of arrangement that didn't feel accidental. The attendant frowned. "Another one?" he muttered. It wasn't the first time they'd found something like this. Always the same spot. Always Platform 7. He looked up at the digital display. For a split second, before resetting, the screen flickered, showing a departure that didn't exist. 26 Kisaragi Station. Then it blinked back to normal. The attendant rubbed his eyes, muttering to himself, and carried the items toward the lost and found. But as he turned, a faint metallic rumble echoed through the tunnel below, far too deep, too heavy for the morning commuter line. He stopped. The sound faded, replaced by the soft chime of the next arrival. But something in the air felt colder now. Later that day, police reviewed the station's overnight footage. At 11:58 p.m., Kenji Sato could be seen sitting alone on Platform 7. At exactly 12, the lights flickered, and for 2 full minutes, the camera feed turned to static. When it resumed, the platform was empty. No sign of anyone leaving. No movement detected. Only one frame remained clear amid the static. A single shot of a train that shouldn't exist, its headlights burning white, its windows filled with blurred silhouettes. And in the last frame, before the feed cut out completely, the figure of a conductor could be seen standing at the open door, cap tilted low, hand raised in a slow, polite salute. After that night, no one waited on Platform 7 after midnight again. One story done, and one to go. I hope you liked the stories so far. When I make these long videos, there are nights where I stay up really late working on them. Tomorrow I will be uploading another video. If you don't want to miss it, just subscribe. It's free. And that wasn't the only strange thing to happen on Tokyo's rail lines. You see, Platform 7 at Shinagawa isn't the only place where trains cross into something they shouldn't. Just a few stops away, another story circulates through Late Night Whispers one about a different line, a different curse, but the same eerie pattern. They call it the last train from Yotsuya Station, a ride that never ends the way it should. Because in Tokyo, the further you travel past midnight, the thinner the line becomes between the living and whatever still lingers in the dark tunnels beneath the city. It was a Friday night in early spring, the kind of night when Tokyo feels like it never sleeps. Neon lights still burned along the streets near Shinjuku, but underground, in the tunnels of the Marunouchi Line, the air had already turned cold and heavy. 22-year-old Haruto Nakajima clutched his bag as he hurried down the escalator at Yotsuya Station. He was a university student, quiet, distracted, and exhausted from another week of late-night study sessions. He'd stayed longer than planned at a friend's apartment, helping review notes for their final exams. Now it was almost midnight, and he had just missed his usual train home to Ogikubo. The digital board above the platform displayed a single remaining departure. Last train, Marunouchi Line, bound for Ikebukuro. The clock read 12:37 a.m. He sighed with relief. He could still make it. Only a few other passengers stood waiting. A middle-aged salaryman slumped against a pillar, a woman in a beige coat scrolling through her phone, and an elderly man staring blankly at the tunnel. The atmosphere was different at this hour, hollow and slow, the usual noise replaced by the quiet hum of electric rails cooling down. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on old concrete. Haruto glanced up at the ceiling. A thin trickle of water dripped steadily from one of the fluorescent fixtures. It fell onto the tiles in a soft, rhythmic pattern, echoing faintly through the tunnel. He told himself it was nothing. Old stations always leaked. A faint gust of wind pushed through the tunnel before the train arrived, carrying the sharp scent of ozone. The lights at the platform's edge flickered once, then steadied. The last train screeched into view, its red stripe glowing faintly under the harsh light. The doors opened with a low, mechanical sigh. Haruto stepped in. The carriage was nearly empty, just as he'd expected. The same 3 passengers boarded behind him, each sitting far apart. The interior smelled faintly of dust and cleaning fluid. The lights overhead hummed quietly, and the floor vibrated as the train pulled away from Yotsuya. He took a seat near the middle, dropping his bag beside him. His reflection shimmered faintly in the dark window. Tired eyes, rumpled hair, a dull expression that matched how he felt. As the train picked up speed, he glanced outside. The tunnels blurred into streaks of light and shadow. He yawned, sinking into his seat. He'd always found something comforting about Tokyo's late-night trains. The rhythm, the repetition, the predictable calm. But tonight felt different. Something about the sound of the tracks was off. Not the steady clack-clack of wheels on metal, but a low, uneven groan, like the train was straining against something. The lights above flickered once, briefly dimming the entire carriage. Haruto looked around. None of the other passengers reacted. The woman in the beige coat sat perfectly still, her phone's screen gone dark. The old man still faced forward, eyes unmoving. The salaryman's head rested against the glass, his reflection warped by the motion of the train. The next station's sign flashed past the window. Akasaka Mitsuke then faded into black. Haruto leaned his head against the seat, eyelids heavy. Just a few stops, he thought. He'd close his eyes for a minute. But as the train rattled deeper into the tunnels, the usual station chime never came. The automated voice announcing each stop was silent. Haruto opened his eyes again. Outside, there were no lights, no glimpses of platforms, just endless darkness rushing past. He checked the overhead display. It was blank. Every light on the digital route map had gone dark, except for one Yotsuya, the starting point. Haruto frowned. Maybe the system was resetting. He glanced at his phone, but there was no signal, no Wi-Fi, not even a flicker of reception. Just a black screen and his own faint reflection. Then he noticed something strange. The old man who'd been sitting near the doors was gone. Haruto looked down the length of the carriage. Empty seats stretched out endlessly, their red fabric glowing faintly in the dim light. The air had gone still. The sound of the train was softer now, slower, somehow deeper. He looked at the nearest window again, expecting to see the dark tunnel walls rushing by. But instead, the reflection of his own face began to fade, replaced by faint shapes behind him. Rows of passengers, silent, motionless, staring straight ahead. And then the lights flickered once more, and every shadow in the carriage shifted. Haruto blinked, trying to clear his vision. The reflections were faint, flickering in and out with every pulse of the overhead light. He turned quickly, expecting to see someone sitting behind him, but the row of seats was empty. Just the steady hum of the train, the faint vibration beneath his shoes, and the soft metallic sway of the carriage doors. He rubbed his eyes and laughed under his breath. "I'm really losing it," he muttered. Maybe he was just overtired. Maybe the reflection had doubled in the glass. But then something felt off. The air. It wasn't just still, it was thick, almost heavy, like the oxygen had been drained out of the space. His ears popped faintly, the way they did inside a tunnel, but this felt deeper, like being underwater. He glanced up at the overhead display again, still blank. The route map flickered once more, but instead of showing the line's stations, strange symbols began to crawl across it, shapes that looked like kanji, but weren't quite right. Older, more angular, like something from a temple tablet. Haruto frowned, leaning closer. What the hell? The lights above him dimmed. Again. This time they stayed low, casting the entire carriage in a dull orange glow. Outside the windows, the tunnel walls were gone. In their place stretched a corridor of endless darkness, cut only by the faintest hint of motion, like something swimming just beyond the glass. The woman in the beige coat, who had been motionless until now, shifted, slowly. Her head turned toward Haruto, her phone still in her lap, the screen cracked down the middle. Her face looked pale, almost colorless under the dim light. Haruto froze, forcing a nervous smile. Weird night, huh? She didn't answer, didn't blink. The silence pressed down, thicker now. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. Then, from the far end of the carriage, came a sound, a faint, dragging noise, like shoes scraping along the floor. Haruto turned sharply. The old man who had vanished earlier was standing near the connecting door between cars, his back turned, facing the glass. He wasn't moving, just standing completely still, one hand pressed to the window. Haruto exhaled shakily and stood. "Sir, are you all right?" No response. He took a step forward. The man's head twitched slightly, the movement sharp and unnatural. His hand slowly slid down the window, leaving a faint smear of something dark behind, maybe grease, maybe blood. "Sir?" Haruto repeated, his voice cracking. The man turned. The motion was wrong, too quick, too smooth. His face was pale and expressionless, but his eyes, they were pitch black. Empty, like the darkness outside had seeped into him. Haruto stumbled back a step, heart hammering. The man opened his mouth not to speak, but to exhale. A dry, rasping sound filled the carriage, like wind moving through a cracked pipe. The air grew colder with each breath he took. Frost began to creep up the metal poles, thin veins of ice stretching toward the ceiling. Haruto pressed himself against the seat. Okay, this isn't happening. He reached for the emergency intercom, slamming the red button near the doors. Nothing. No voice, no sound, not even static. The lights flickered violently now, the entire carriage trembling as the train picked up speed. Haruto stumbled, grabbing onto the pole, and looked out the window again. The tunnel wasn't a tunnel anymore. The walls had melted into a swirling blur of shapes, flashes of wooden beams, red lanterns, stone pillars. For a moment, he thought he saw what looked like the curved roof of an old temple flashing past outside, then a stretch of earth covered in gravestones, and then the loudspeaker crackled above him. At first, it was just static. Then came a voice. "Next stop, Yotsuya Cemetery." Haruto froze. His mind went blank. Cemetery? He'd ridden this line hundreds of times. There was no such stop. He looked around the carriage again, hoping someone else had heard it. The salaryman by the window still sat motionless, his chin resting on his chest. But something about him looked wrong now. His skin too pale, his hands too stiff. The lights flickered again. The woman in the beige coat was gone. Haruto's pulse spiked. He scanned the seats, the aisles, the reflections. Nothing. Just empty rows of red cushions stretching endlessly down the car. He turned back toward the front. The connecting door was open now. He hadn't seen it slide. Through the narrow passage, a faint figure moved tall, wearing a dark uniform, cap tilted low. A conductor. Haruto's voice caught in his throat. "Hey! Excuse me! Where are we?" The conductor stepped fully into view, one gloved hand resting on the metal pole. His head turned slowly, and Haruto saw his face for the first time, thin, gray, and perfectly still. His eyes were closed, but his mouth moved in a small, rehearsed smile. "Tickets, please," he said softly. Haruto's hands trembled. I already tapped my card." The conductor tilted his head. "No one rides for free." And, as he spoke, Haruto noticed something behind him through the glass connecting the next carriage. Rows and rows of passengers sat perfectly still, their faces identical. Pale, expressionless, eyes hollow. Each one held a ticket. The same pale hand extended toward Haruto again. "Tickets, please!" Haruto backed away, shaking his head, but the conductor followed, his shoes making no sound on the floor. The lights flickered again, and suddenly the car was full. Every seat now occupied by those same motionless passengers, silent, breathing in unison. Haruto pressed himself against the door, fumbling for the emergency latch, but it was sealed shut. And then, just as the lights dimmed one final time, the voice from the speaker whispered again. "Next stop, Yotsuya Cemetery." The train slowed, but there was no sound of brakes. Only the faint chorus of shallow breaths that weren't his own. The train slowed, but it didn't stop. It just kept crawling forward, the lights outside dimming into total blackness. The low hum of the engine filled the air, vibrating through Haruto's chest like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He pressed himself against the door, eyes darting from the pale passengers to the silent conductor who stood unmoving in the aisle. Every part of his brain screamed to wake up, to find something normal, a sound, an announcement, anything. But all that came was the faint metallic groan of the rails twisting beneath them. Then the conductor spoke again. "Tickets, please." His voice was softer now, less human, like it came from somewhere deep inside the train itself. Haruto's hands shook as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his student pass anything to get the man to stop staring. He held it out, but the conductor didn't take it. His gaze, though his eyes were still closed, seemed fixed on Haruto's chest. "Not valid," he murmured. Haruto swallowed hard. "What do you mean, not valid? It's the same pass. I always use." The man tilted his head, the motion slow and deliberate. "Not for this line." The words echoed in the hollow space of the carriage. Haruto took a step back, but the train jolted suddenly, throwing him off balance. When he caught himself on the metal pole, he realized the passengers had changed again. They weren't facing forward anymore. Every single one of them had turned their heads toward him. Their faces were blank, gray, their eyes open, but lifeless, like masks that had forgotten what expression to wear. He stumbled down the aisle, trying not to look at them. His shoulder brushed one figure's sleeve, and it felt wrong, cold, and dry, like fabric wrapped around nothing at all. He reached the end of the carriage and slammed his hand against the door to the next car. Locked. He pounded again, shouting, "Hey! Anyone there?" A faint voice answered, muffled through the glass. "Don't open it." Haruto froze. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the door. The voice was faint, trembling. It sounded young, a woman, maybe in her 20s. "Please," she whispered. "You can still get out. Don't let him touch you." Haruto's throat tightened. "Who are you? What's happening?" But before she could answer, the train lurched violently, cutting her off. The lights flickered once, twice then went completely out. The world fell into pitch blackness. For a few seconds, the only sound was Haruto's ragged breathing. Then, somewhere close, impossibly close, he heard the conductor's voice again, whispering right beside his ear. "Ticket inspection complete." Haruto flinched away, scrambling toward the other end of the car. The lights buzzed back to life, but dimmer than before, tinted a deep reddish hue. The air smelled like burnt metal and smoke. He looked back down the aisle and froze. The conductor was gone. But in his place, the rows of passengers now sat perfectly upright, their hands folded neatly in, their laps. Their eyes were all open, and every single one of them had turned to face the windows. Haruto followed their gaze. The darkness outside was gone. The train was moving through what looked like a city, but not Tokyo. The buildings were old, wooden, lit by paper lanterns. The streets were empty, the sky a dull crimson haze. And scattered across the rooftops, he could see figures standing motionless, facing the train as it passed. The overhead speakers crackled again. "Approaching. Yotsuya Cemetery." Haruto's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned back toward the passengers. None of them moved. None even blinked. Then, something new appeared in his peripheral vision. A faint glow from beneath the seat across from him. He crouched down. A folded piece of paper had been wedged between the floor panels, an old, yellowed ticket. The ink was smudged, but he could still read part of it, issued. 1959. Destination, Yotsuya. And beneath it, scrawled by hand, a single line in fading ink. "Don't look back when the doors open." Haruto's heart hammered. His breath came in quick bursts. He shoved the ticket into his pocket just as the train began to slow again. Outside, the strange crimson glow deepened. The paper lanterns blurred past faster and faster until they dissolved into darkness again. A loud hiss echoed through the carriage as the brakes screeched, and for the first time since Yotsuya Station the train stopped. The conductor's voice came again, now soft and steady. "Yotsuya Cemetery. End of the line." The doors slid open with a long, metallic groan. Cold air rushed in, smelling faintly of earth and incense. Haruto stared at the doorway but didn't move. The world outside was too dark to see clearly. Only faint outlines of stone pillars and something that looked like a torii gate in the distance. None of the other passengers moved either. They just sat there, perfectly still. Then, one by one, their heads began to turn toward him again. And though their lips didn't move, a whisper filled the carriage, overlapping in countless voices, low, breathless, and impossible to ignore. "Get off!" Haruto backed away, shaking his head. No, I'm not. The lights above him flickered violently, and the whisper grew louder. Get off. The cold wind surged through the open door, carrying with it the faint chime of temple bells and the smell of something long dead. And beneath the rising whisper of the dead passengers, he could swear he heard it faint footsteps stepping onto the platform outside. Someone, or something, was waiting for him to join them. The doors stood open, but no one moved. The air that drifted in was colder than before, sharp enough to sting Haruto's throat as he breathed. The faint smell of incense, mixed with something metallic blood or rust, he couldn't tell. He clutched the edge of his seat, heart racing, eyes fixed on the black space beyond the door. There was no platform, no lights, no familiar tiled floor, only dirt. Dark, uneven soil stretching out beneath a pale, colorless sky. Then he saw them. Figures, standing motionless, just outside the train. Dozens of them. They were half-shrouded in fog, their shapes faintly human but indistinct, like the air itself refused to hold their outlines steady. Some wore kimonos, others business suits or school uniforms, all faded and torn, like memories decaying over time. One of them, a woman, with long black hair hanging over her face, tilted her head slowly toward him. Haruto's breath hitched. The whisper returned. The same word, over and over, threading through the air from every direction. Get off, get off, get off. He shook his head violently. No. His voice sounded small, broken. The sound vanished almost instantly, swallowed by the stillness. He glanced around the carriage. Every passenger was now standing, perfectly upright. Heads bowed slightly, arms limp for their sides. The conductor stood at the far end, hat low over his eyes, one hand raised as if in command. The train shuddered once, as though urging him to move. The lights flickered, casting harsh shadows across the walls. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint outlines of other faces there, hundreds of them pressed into the metal, watching. The whispering grew louder. Haruto's vision swam. His body wanted to move, to step forward, to obey whatever force was calling him outside. His legs trembled. The ticket in his pocket felt hot, almost burning through the fabric. He ripped it out and looked at it again. The ink had changed. Passenger, Haruto Nakajima. Destination, Yotsuya Cemetery. He dropped it instantly, heart pounding so hard he thought he might faint. The conductor stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the floor. You've reached your stop, he said softly. Haruto backed away. I never bought that ticket! The conductor tilted his head. You boarded the last train. All who ride must arrive. I didn't mean to. The lights cut out. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, slowly, the train's interior filled with a faint red glow, not from the bulbs, but from outside. The fog had turned crimson, pulsing faintly, revealing what lay beyond the open doors. Rows upon rows of gravestones stretched into the distance. Stone tablets covered in moss, tilted and broken, their inscriptions eroded by time. Between them, shadows moved silent, fluid, weaving through the graves like echoes of wind. And right in front of the train stood the torii gate he had glimpsed earlier, its paint chipped and blackened, the wood cracked down the center. Hanging from its crossbeam was a rusted lantern, swaying gently even though there was no breeze. The conductor turned toward it and bowed. The passengers behind him did the same. Haruto's stomach twisted. No. Then, from the crowd outside, the long-haired woman began to move. Her feet dragged against the ground as she stepped closer. the fog curling around her ankles. She raised a pale hand and pointed directly at him. Every passenger inside the train turned their head toward him in unison. "Get off!" they whispered again, voices rising together, now overlapping, echoing, breaking apart. "Get off the train!" Haruto pressed himself against the wall, shaking. His chest felt tight, his breath coming in gasps. "I'm not supposed to be here," he whispered. "I'm not supposed to be here." The conductor took another step closer. His voice was calm, almost sympathetic. "No one ever is." He reached out a gloved hand. "Come. You've reached the end of your journey." The ticket on the floor flared up in a burst of orange light, disintegrating into ash. Haruto screamed and stumbled toward the back of the carriage, slamming against the door. It refused to open. He turned and looked down the aisle and froze. The faces of the passengers were changing. Their skin cracked like old porcelain, splitting open to reveal something dark beneath. Black smoke leaked from their mouths as they whispered, their voices now merging into a single rhythmic chant. "Join us!" Haruto fell to his knees, clutching his head. The sound was unbearable. The train itself seemed to pulse with it, the floor vibrating, the windows rattling violently. Outside, the fog thickened until it pressed right against the glass. And through it, shapes began to form hands, pale and skeletal, slapping against the windows from the outside. He screamed again, but the noise was swallowed by the chorus of the dead. Then, abruptly, the chanting stopped. Silence. The conductor stood before him, so close Haruto could see the faint outline of stitches along his neck, as though his head had been sewn back on. "Don't fight it," he said gently. "Everyone takes the last train once." He reached out again, and for a moment, Haruto thought he saw something human flicker in the man's expression. A flash of pity. Then the whistle blew. A long, low wail that reverberated through the entire carriage. The doors began to close. Haruto lunged forward, diving through the narrow gap just before they sealed shut. He hit the dirt outside hard, rolling onto his back. The train's wheels screeched, sparks flying as it began to move again. He scrambled to his feet, covered in dust, gasping for air. Through the red fog, he watched the last car slide past. The windows were dark now, except one. In it, he saw his own reflection staring back at him, except it wasn't moving. And as the ghost train disappeared into the crimson mist, the reflection slowly raised its hand and waved goodbye. Haruto stumbled through the red mist, his lungs burning as he gasped for air. The ground beneath his feet was soft, almost spongy, covered in a thin layer of moss and loose soil. Every step sank slightly, leaving faint impressions that vanished moments later, as if the earth itself refused to hold his presence. The train's whistle echoed one last time in the distance, fading as the ghostly carriages vanished into the fog. Soon the only sound left was the faint ringing of a temple bell somewhere far away. It tolled slowly, each chime vibrating through the ground like the heartbeat of something ancient. He looked around. The graveyard stretched endlessly in every direction, the same torii gate he'd seen before now looming behind him like a warning sign. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and incense. Faded paper talismans hung from old trees, fluttering weakly, though there was no wind. Haruto turned in circles, trying to get his bearings. "There has to be a way out," he whispered to himself, though even his voice sounded smaller here. That's when he noticed it, a faint light flickering deeper within the cemetery. A single lantern glow, golden and soft, like the kind used by temple caretakers. He hesitated, then started walking toward it. The mist shifted around him, shapes occasionally forming at its edges, outlines of figures bowing, kneeling, whispering prayers he couldn't understand. Every time he blinked, they vanished. The lantern hung beside a small wooden shrine half swallowed by ivy. Its door stood slightly ajar. Haruto stepped closer, his footsteps crunching softly over gravel. Inside, he could see an altar old, dust-covered, but still intact. Offerings of withered flowers and broken incense sticks littered the floor, and at the center of the altar lay something that made his stomach twist. A train ticket, old, yellowed, edges frayed. He reached for it, cautiously. The ink was faint, but he could still make out the characters. Marunouchi Line passenger. Haruto Nakajima destination. Yotsuya Cemetery. But below that, a second line had been written by hand in red ink. Fare paid by ancestor journey inherited. His breath caught. He stared at the words, the phrase looping through his mind until it began to make sense in a way that terrified him. This wasn't random. He hadn't just wandered into a curse, he'd inherited it. The bell rang again in the distance, deeper now, more urgent. He stumbled back from the altar. His thoughts spun in frantic circles. Could it be connected to his family? His grandfather had grown up near this very area, he'd mentioned it once in passing. And there had been a story, a family rumor, about a man who had worked on the subway tunnels before the war. A collapse. Several workers never recovered. His grandfather used to say, "The tunnels took them, and they never came home." Haruto's pulse quickened. He turned around sharply, heart pounding, suddenly aware that he wasn't alone. A figure stood a few meters away, half shrouded by mist. It was the conductor. The same dark uniform, the same stitched neck, but his expression was different now, calmer, less severe. Haruto stumbled backward. "Stay! Away from me!" The man raised one hand slowly, not in threat, but in silence, a small gesture of peace. "You don't understand," he said softly. "You weren't supposed to ride alone." "What are you talking about?" Haruto demanded. "Who are you? What is this place?" The conductor's head tilted slightly. "A station between worlds," he said. "A stop built by the living, but claimed by the dead. Every soul who dies on the tracks, every spirit left behind in these tunnels passes through here. The trains keep running because no one remembers to stop them." Haruto's mind reeled. "Then why me?" The man stepped closer, his eyes dim with exhaustion, not malice. "Your blood remembers what others forgot." The words hung heavy in the air. "My blood?" The conductor nodded once. "Your ancestor built the line beneath Yotsuya, the one that connected the living city to the cemetery. But he took something from this ground that was never his, and so the toll must be paid." Haruto shook his head, backing away. "That's not that, can't be real." The conductor's gaze lowered to the ticket, still trembling in Haruto's hand. "You paid the fare the moment you boarded." The air grew colder. The mist around them thickened until it swallowed the shrine, the torii, the graves. All that remained was the faint glow of the lantern and the echo of the bell tolling one last time. Haruto's chest tightened. Then, what happens now? The conductor's expression softened. "If you wish to leave, you must finish what your ancestor began. You must make the offering." Haruto's breath came fast. "What offering?" The man didn't answer immediately. He just pointed toward the ground where the lantern's light shimmered faintly over the soil. There, half buried in the dirt, was an old shovel. Its wooden handle was wrapped in prayer beads. Haruto crouched down, his hands trembling as he brushed the soil away. Underneath the shovel, something metallic gleamed. A rusted plaque, engraved with worn words that made his stomach twist once more. "Construction of Marunouchi Line, 1937, dedicated to those who never returned." He looked back up, but the conductor was gone. The bell stopped ringing. Only the wind remained. whispering faintly through the graves. He turned toward the empty darkness where the train had vanished, and there, at the edge of the mist, he saw them again, the silent passengers, standing among the gravestones, faces calm now, no longer twisted in anguish. They bowed in unison. And just before they faded completely, Haruto heard the conductor's voice one final time, soft, distant, echoing through the mist. "The last train runs until the debt is paid. Be careful which ticket you take." The lantern went out, and Haruto was alone again. Morning broke over Tokyo like nothing had happened. The city was alive again, trains rattling, phones ringing, people hurrying through turnstiles with coffee in hand. The Marunouchi Line ran on schedule, red carriages sliding smoothly between stations. At Yotsuya, a station attendant swept the platform, whistling softly to himself. The night shift had left a note about some minor power fluctuation, flickering lights, nothing serious. Routine maintenance, they said. Then his broom caught on something wedged beneath a bench. He bent down and pulled out a half-buried object caked in dirt, a student ID card. He brushed the dust away and frowned. Haruto Nakajima, University of Tokyo. The photo was recent, the issue date only a year old. He looked around. "Another lost item?" he muttered. But something else glinted beside the ID. A small paper ticket, yellowed and brittle, tucked neatly into the corner of the bench. The attendant picked it up carefully. Marunouchi Line, destination, Yotsuya Cemetery. He squinted. What kind of joke is this? Behind him, the intercom crackled. A distorted voice murmured, through the static too faint to catch at first, then clearer. "Now departing. Yotsuya Station. Next stop." The message cut off abruptly. He turned toward the tracks. The platform was empty. But for a moment, just a blink, he saw it. A flash of red light deep inside the tunnel. The faint outline of an old train carriage gliding silently through the dark. No sound, no headlights. Just a dim glow fading into nothing. The attendant rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the tunnel was empty. The morning light from the entrance shimmered across the rails, undisturbed. He shook his head, chuckled nervously, and slipped the ID and ticket into his lost and found pouch. But as he turned to leave, the digital display above the platform flickered once. For exactly 3 seconds, the screen displayed a single message in old, fading characters. Next train 12:37 a.m., Yotsuya Cemetery. Then it blinked back to normal. And somewhere deep beneath the station, a faint bell tolled once, as if another train had just begun its journey. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Tomorrow we will be uploading another terrifying story. Feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications to never miss another scary video. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.